All right, so let's get started in Transaction Desk. When you guys first get signed into the MLS portal, there's going to be a link right here. It kind of looks like a little green mohawk, or uh, I've heard it described as a bunch of uh, money flying. Either way, you guys want to visualize this or conceptualize this, go ahead and click on that link, and it should bring you to a place that looks like this. This is the agent dashboard, or what effectively is the home page for Transaction Desk. For those of you guys who might have already been signed into Matrix, there's actually going to be a link here called External Links that's going to allow us to get over to Transaction Desk, Showing Time, Home Visit, RPR, a couple other options. But you guys can always click on that link there. Also, if you guys have been looking at a specific property in a certain search that you guys have been doing, there's going to be a link for every single listing that's shown up here that has a start a transaction option. So this is going to appear on every single listing that you guys have. So if you do end up in a situation where you just want to grab the details for one specific property and go directly into a transaction with this MLS number, you can just hit that start a transaction button either from the search page or from within the listing details. There's going to be a little start a transaction button down there as well. All right, so let's hop back into Transaction Desk. So on this dashboard, the homepage that we have here, there is currently a little green bar up at the top there. Transaction Desk is currently trying to do some advertising for service that they're providing. This is going to appear in another spot in just a bit here. You can hit the X on that to get rid of it. It'll close it out for the day so that way you don't have to see it again. And then if you do end up seeing that anywhere else, you can also hit that little X to get rid of it if you're not interested. It is a day-by-day thing, so you may see it pop up again and just hit the X on it. It'll eventually go away. All right. So first things first, Transaction Desk is where you guys can go to fill out any forms or documents that you guys need, get them sent off to be signed, and then kind of keep all of the documentation for a specific listing or transaction, property information, whatever you guys are using the system for, all in one location. Now, in order to start up effectively a folder in order for all of this information to reside, you need to use this little Create Transaction button. There's also an easy option on the home page to just start assigning immediately, but the rest of this home page is really going to be up to you. I would recommend always leaving the transactions section over here to the left, and then also the Authentisign section as well. But if you guys are looking at your page, or if you guys maybe remember what your page looked like, mine might look a little bit different. So before we get into any of the practical stuff about the transactions and creating folders and so on and so forth, I want to actually discuss this homepage and how we can customize this. I'm a big proponent of the idea of doing workspace optimization. In fact, I actually used to teach a class on that at a call center I worked at, trying to help people that had long call times try and use keyboard shortcuts and tabs on their internet browser, and not having so many windows open, or even just trying to optimize the actual screen real estate that they have to try and ensure that whenever you land wherever you're trying to go, you're immediately presented with the information that's most relevant to you so you can just dive directly in. So up here at the top right corner, this little padlock icon, this is actually going to unlock the screen. What that means is that on top of each of these widgets, we now have a little bit of texture to it. So that means that if I wanted to move this document upload up into a different position, I can just click and drag that into the right spot and move things around the way that I would like for them to appear. Down here at the very bottom of the screen, I'm going to have a couple lists that I actually don't want anymore. So for instance, this checklist thing, I've got tons of transactions, tons of signings, tons of forms, but I've only got one checklist. So clearly this isn't actually serving my needs. I'm going to go ahead and just hit this little X to get rid of it. Same thing goes with the forms. I'm not really going to necessarily need to see these forms in this format. In fact, oftentimes I'm just going to go directly into a transaction to view those forms. So having it show up on my home page and kind of take up space that could be occupied by something more relevant to me is not really serving my needs. So again, I'm just going to hit the X to get rid of it. Now, coincidentally, whenever I was clicking the X to get rid of those, they ended up back up here in this tray up here at the top. And you'll notice that whenever you unlock the homepage, you'll see that tray appear. You can scroll over to see all of the options. The blue buttons are going to be represented up here at the top. And you see that there's a create transaction. This matches the icon up here. We've got a create signing, again, matching the same icon, and the upload option. So all of these that are already appearing on my screen are in blue, or in gray, excuse me. And then all the ones that I can add are going to be in blue. So I just click and drag, I drop it on there, and now I have a button to actually get a new contact created. Same thing goes with email docs or fax docs or templates or even just get started. You can drop all of those on there if need be. But if you don't want them, you hit the X and they start to fill that bar up at the top again. So if you do end up accidentally getting rid of something that you might need, don't worry, it's just going to be up here in the top. Click and drag, and you can even resize these to make them larger, smaller, wider, taller, whatever you guys need. Now, once you guys set this up into a fashion that's going to be best suited for you, hit that little padlock again, locks everything down, and now we can go ahead and move forward. Now, customizing that might be something you may want to wait on in case this happens to be something where, let's say that you guys aren't familiar with the system at all, and you're just wanting to effectively just get a little bit of an overview of everything before you really start making dramatic changes to it, or layout options need to be removed or added or whatever. It might be good to wait, but I did want to at least mention that because that is going to be an important element of trying to get directly to where you need to go at any time. All right, let's start off with the creating of a transaction. Now, this is one of the things that I've gotten a lot of phone calls on, and over time I've kind of discovered part of the reason why people have had some trouble with Transaction Desk is not fully understanding what each of the terms means. First and foremost, the transactions that we're creating, I try to make people understand that this is effectively just a manila folder that you're creating. You're just putting together a bunch of documents, a bunch of details, a bunch of forms, whatever the case may be, into a central location. You're going to have a bunch of details that are going to be filled out and then propagated onto each of those forms. So in order for me to actually get all of that information gathered into one place, I'm going to be putting together that manila folder, and I just need to put a name on the label. Now, the name can be whatever you would like it to be, but just as a recommendation, what I would suggest doing is actually going in here and putting in whatever the name is of the person that you're going to be working with, Smiths. And then I'm also going to be putting in the address as well. Now, part of the reason why we decided that this was kind of the best way to do it is because if we end up working with a certain individual again in the future, it's going to make sense that if I've just named the transaction after the individual, now I've got two transactions named the exact same thing. If I just name it the address of the property, and then I'm going through here and maybe I got the buyer and the seller, and it's just like, wait a second. Oh, that's right. It was the Sandusky Avenue address that I was thinking of. It's not going to be quite as clear who it was that you were working with, and it might make it a little bit difficult to actually track things down. I've seen both of those happen, and I've seen a lot of people kind of get a little bit confused as to where things are. If you're really good at remembering what things are named or where things are located, it's not going to be a big deal. Name it whatever you'd like. But for my sake, I have just started going through the process of just naming everything after the people I'm involved with and the address that we're going to be discussing, just to keep things clear for me. But that's just my recommendation. Next, let's talk about this template option. And actually, before I move on from the name side, notice that is the only field that's actually required. So on this template option, you may notice that whenever you get into Transaction Desk that you don't even see this choice to begin with. That's not necessarily a bad thing. What that's indicating is just that you don't have a template that you've created or a template that your office has created for you. If you guys would like to create a template, we're actually going to be discussing how to do that at the end of class. We also have an option here for the type. This should appear for everyone, Though I have noticed that some offices do actually have the option to remove the type in preference to creating a full template that replaces any of the type options entirely. So instead of just doing a residential listing type and then having to grab all the forms and documents and everything that might need to be added to that residential listing, an office may have actually created a template that includes everything that you'll need. And then that way you don't even have to choose a type because choosing the template will automatically set the type. And just as an example of that, I have a residential listing packet, and it just automatically removes that type section because it's going to know that this is actually a residential listing by default. But we're not going to be using a template or any of the autofill options on the import data. So right now I'm just going to put in a residential listing, and you notice this final option automatically was selected. So instead of it just, assuming, all right, I don't have any need to add the individual that's creating this transaction to the transaction, whenever we start doing a residential sale, it's going to automatically assume I'm the selling agent. If I do a residential listing, it's going to automatically assume I'm the agent, and so on. So we also have a section here that's the import data. This allows us to switch between MLS tech, which means that I just put in the MLS number for the property. Just as an example, I mentioned earlier that when you guys are looking in Matrix, you can find a property, click on this Start a Transaction button, and what it's going to do is actually import all of the data over from that particular listing so that instead of us having to autofill everything, get everything created, put in the bedroom count, the bathroom count, the price, the agent information, all of those other extra details, it's just going to automatically grab that information and you can create the transaction from there. In our case, we're not going to actually be using a specific listing. We're going to be starting with a completely blank slate. And I also wanted to point out that we have a relist option as well. So for instance, if you don't have a past listing for this property, or if you don't have a listing for the property to begin with, that MLS Tech isn't going to serve your needs. If you do have a property that has a parcel and has some details about it, you can go into the relist one, just choose whichever county that you're going to be searching within, and then put in whatever the tax ID is. Now, the tax ID that it's looking for is the parcel ID, or the tax parcel number, or the tax ID, or the APN, or there's a huge variety of different ways that each county will actually refer to this. I've even heard of some counties calling it the account number. There's a huge amount of variance to that, but what it effectively boils down to is that when you guys find your listing or your property that you're working with in Realist, there's going to be an APN number up here at the top of the screen. This APN number is the ID that this particular listing will need whenever you go back into Transaction Desk to actually search for that particular property. Oops. So for instance, if I just grabbed this information here, I could use this to fill in the information that I have for this particular property onto this particular transaction. Now, let's say that we don't have that particular number first. So I've gone through, I've already talked about the address with my client, but lo and behold, I didn't actually end up grabbing that detail from them. There is a search function over here to the right that allows us to search for the property using just the basic search functions that you guys might expect. So street number, street name, township range, or township, city, zip code, etc. Once you guys have searched for that property, so for instance, I'll just do 1373 Riverside. Here we go, search data. I can find the information, select it, and we're good to go. It'll automatically fill as much information as it can from this particular listing, or excuse me, from this particular property, and then you can just move forward. But again, we're going to be starting with a blank slate, so I'm going to leave mine on select source. If you're following along with this right now, which don't feel that you need to, but if you're following along with this right now, again, just leave it on a blank slate. You can also import data if you would like to. It's completely up to you. This is just a training run just to make sure that you guys can see how this works more than it is trying to dictate how you should be working. Down at the very bottom of the screen, beyond the Add Me As The with its limited options, we have a button there that says Use Wizard. This Use Wizard option is indicating to us that what we're going to be doing is actually starting off on a set of rails. Now, this is actually a good thing. I think a lot of people might feel like, well, I can get everything filled in myself. There are some people that have been using Transaction Desk from literally the day that we launched it, and they still use that wizard, even though it's been, what, 11 or 12 years since we initially introduced this to the membership. So I would suggest, even though this may feel like, I don't want to have the training wheels on or something like that, this wizard is actually meant to just help everybody get everything that they need, full stop. It's not meant for just the beginners or noobs or something. It's meant for everybody to make sure that all of their transactions include all the details that they might need to include. So once we've got all this information filled out, I'm going to hit this create button right up here at the top. I think one of the beneficial things about Transaction Desk is how a lot of this stuff is actually designed in such a way that it's very easy to see what's supposed to be done. So right up here at the top, we got a close button in red, we got a gigantic create button in blue, hit create, and we're good to go. So whenever we get signed into or whenever we start off with the transaction, it's going to start showing us some information up here at the top of the screen. We'll notice that no matter where we are in the transaction, we're always going to see this information appearing up at the top. So just remember that this is going to be indicating the name of the transaction. We can always go back and change this at any time. So for instance, if I ended up getting the buyers, I can always come back here and say Johnson's. So we can say Smith Johnson so that I don't forget that. But again, naming conventions are what they are. Do whatever you think is going to help you the most. We also have a status that's up here. Coincidentally, that actually is repeated down here on the first step of the wizard, which is the transaction status. The transaction status section is going to include some options that may look familiar. We've got active, pending, closed. We've got an expired and withdrawn. And there's even an extra option here called closed file complete. And then the option that we currently are on, which is open. Open, here's our green bar, just get rid of that. So what this is actually indicating to us is that before we've actually got a listing in the system, so before the listing has gone active, before the listing goes pending or closed or whatever, we don't have a listing in the system. Right now, I'm actually literally going through and trying to fill out the information about the property and then get the listing agreement signed and sent off, maybe even get a property condition disclosure and the property data form filled out. Like there's a whole bunch of extra work that have to go into it before it even becomes active. So this open is effectively meant to be a limbo state. What this means is that when we're going through and actually creating everything, we can kind of leave it as just it exists, it's here, it's ready for us to use. But as soon as I actually get that listing saved and it's active, I can switch this back over to active. And there's even a space right here for the MLS number, which as a mention is going to appear up at the top here. Now, this is the first time we're actually going to see this information start appearing up at the top. And the same thing's actually going to happen whenever we start putting in the address as well. So I'm going to put in the address here. Go. Let's do, we'll do Broken Arrow today. Broken Arrow is a hot market right now anyway, right? So when I started adding this in, notice that this information is actually starting to appear up at the top. So this is going to appear under the address. So again, as far as naming conventions are concerned, we might not even necessarily need to name it the address, because once we get into the listing, it shows it, or into the transaction, excuse me, it shows it. But again, finding it is going to be the part that you need to name it for. Here we'll put in Tulsa County. Oops. Okay, 741, I don't know, 23. There we go. So I've got some basic details put in here. I'm going to put in a legal description. I'm going to keep this really vague because you don't really need the legal description to be too overwhelmingly complex. That should work for me. So I've got some basic details in there. I'm going to put in a list price as well. 123, 123, 123. Perfect. Got a nice $1 billion property here. It's Sandusky Avenue. We'll see if I can get Elon Musk to buy it. You know, since he's already buying Twitter, why not buy a house too, you know? All right, so I've got this set to open. I'm going to set this to residential. It's already got my property type, or my transaction type, excuse me, set over here. I just need to make sure my property type matches that. So I'm good to go. So I can go ahead and hit next. This is going to bring me to step 2 of 5. Now, the second step is just going to be some additional details, all specifically going to be referring to the transaction dates. So click on the list date. I'm going to choose today. Click on expiration date, choose tomorrow, here today, gone tomorrow, good to go. Now, at the bottom of the screen, I've got a save and exit button. I'm going to hit this next button to actually move on to step 3, and you'll notice that this is actually staying here the entire time. So this was even back there on step 1. But what this is allowing us to do is effectively just say, oh, you know what? I got another person that's calling. They've got a transaction that they need to ask questions about, or a signing that they're having issues with, or whatever's happening. I can just go ahead and hit save and exit, and it's going to bring me to my dashboard, save whatever information I had been doing in my wizard, and then I can jump back into wherever it was that I was needing to go, and then finally get back to where I was in that previous transaction. Now, in order to get back into something, so for instance, if your browser closes, or your computer dies, or you just needed to, again, go check on something else, there's an odometer icon over here on the left that brings us back to our homepage, the agent dashboard. And any of the transactions that you've updated most recently are going to appear in reverse chronological order in this transactions option. So what we'll see is that our most recent modification is going to appear at the top, and then the next most recent, and so on and so forth. So I can jump right back into my Smith Sandusky Avenue. And then if I wanted to jump back into wherever I left off on the wizard, I click on wizard, and it'll bring me back to step 3, which is where I hit that save and exit button. So the save and exit button, just as a heads up, it's going to be there. It's going to keep on appearing at the bottom of the screen, but it's really not going to show itself too obviously until we get to this contacts page. Don't worry about it. This is just to make sure that you guys can leave. Always try and stay on the rails of the wizard if you can. Now, I know that was a little bit of a journey outside of where we were going. So let's just do a quick recap of where we landed. We created the transaction. We automatically had it start the wizard. We filled out all of our details here on the first page. We got a couple dates on the second page. And here we are now on the third step, which is contacts. Now on the contacts page, we're going to see automatically, I've got my information put in as well as my broker information. So the actual office that I work for. Up here at the top right is going to be an add option. So since I already added myself as the listing agent, I'm here, but it doesn't automatically have my seller's information. So up at the top right corner, I'm just going to click this add button. And we've got 4 different options on here. Create new transaction contact, which is the one that we're actually going to be using. This is going to allow us to just create a contact that's specific to this transaction. So we don't have to worry about accidentally seeing this on another transaction later, unless I wanted to add that myself, which is actually going to be the second option, add existing contact. So if I had created a transaction contact for even just a previous listing, I can go back into my address book, find that individual, and go ahead and add them to this new transaction. As a little kind of practical example for that, let's say that you end up having a seller, they sold their home, and now all of a sudden they're trying to buy a home, and hey, would you look at that? They would like to use you as their realtor. Good job. You get to use that add existing contact, grab that seller from the previous transaction, change their role, and now they're the buyer. The next option is going to be add yourself, but thankfully, again, we've already got ourselves put in there. And finally, we have an add contact from Google. For those of you guys using an Android device or Gmail account at all, you guys can go ahead and import a contact directly over from your Google contacts if need be. So I'm going to put in this create new transaction contact, and we're going to start from scratch with someone. So we have only 3 red asterisks on the screen. We've got our type, first name, and last name. That is it. Now, as you guys may have already noticed, all of this stuff is being done digitally. So even though it doesn't actually have an option there to, or it doesn't have a requirement there to fill out the email address, I would still recommend considering it something that you're going to need to put in every single time you guys start a new transaction contact. So again, even though there is no red asterisk here indicating that this is something that's required, just try to conceptualize that as something that you need to fill out as soon as it presents the opportunity to. So on the type, I'm going to put in seller. On the first name, we'll do John Smith. There we go. Played excellently by, what's his name, Brad Pitt. We'll put in an email address. That's a little bit of a dated movie reference, isn't it? And then there's an option down here at the bottom that says add to address book. Now, this add to address book option, it's going to be checked by default. If you guys are, in fact, actually following along either in the recording or live right now, you don't necessarily have to create a real contact. You can just put in something filler, do like email@email.com or something like that. As long as you're not actually sending anything, it won't matter. But if you are creating a fake contact just to get in the practice of what we're doing, go ahead and uncheck that checkbox. But the rest of the time, I would actually suggest that you guys go through the process of adding someone to the address book, because you never really know if you're actually going to end up needing that contact in the future. So might as well leave that on there. There is also an option over here at the top that says address. Now I'm going to switch my guy over here to buyer instead. When we get to the address page, it just has street name, street, blah, 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 just basic address information, some contact information, that's it. If I switch this person over to a seller and get back over to my address page, it's going to leave us an option up here at the top that says same as property address. Now, this is beneficial for one very specific reason. If you have somebody that lives in their property, you can just check the checkbox, and next thing you know, all of those details for the property that we had already filled out, so again, that address, the zip code, all that stuff, just automatically gets filled in for me. So no extra muss, no extra fuss. We just put that in there and we're good to go. Now, I also wanted to address one more thing here on the general tab before we save our contact. We have a legal name section, a preferred signature and preferred initials. What these are actually allowing us to do is put in any additional information if, let's say, John wanted to go by Johnny. That's his preferred signature. You can put in Johnny B. Good Smith. There we go. And then his initials, JBS. Perfect. So we can put in any information extra that we needed to. But this legal name option is a little bit less cut and dry. The legal name actually will allow us to put in business names, trusts that they might be signing for, groups or organizations, whatever the case may be. So for instance, if John Smith in this case is actually very literally going to be representing an organization or a trust, the legal name is where we would put in the name of that organization or trust. So Smith Construction might need to be put on there so that on the forms and paperwork, wherever the organization that's actually buying the property will be referenced, it's going to go back and cite the legal name field. So in this case, on those pieces of, or on those forms, it's going to have Smith Construction. And then whenever that comes to the signing, John Smith is actually going to have to put in his John Hancock in this case. All right, now I'm going to clear that out. And we don't need any bad music jokes in there. We'll just, not bad music, bad jokes that happen to be about music. There we go. So we're going to hit save up here at the top. We got our John Smith. Let's go ahead and add his wife. Again, we're going to mark her as seller. Jane Smith. There we go. And I wanted to point one of the small changes from those of you guys, or for those of you guys who are using .loop, a small change from .loop that you guys might need to know. So in Transaction Desk, you do have the option to actually add two individuals with the exact same email address. I've been told that this is something that .loop, even still today, does not allow you to do, where if you have two contacts, you cannot have the same email address for both of them. When we get to the signing process, I will actually address how to make sure that this is still going to be signed securely. We're just going to end up needing to add in a signing pin. But again, we'll be getting back to that a little bit later. I am going to give both of my clients the same email address for now. I just wanted to point out, again, for those of you guys using systems that don't allow that, this will allow you guys to have the same email address for this for two different contacts. If you guys haven't come across that in the past, this is actually a relatively common thing. We've got older couples that maybe just share an email address. We've got younger couples, like, I mean, I had friends of mine in college at ORU that had Facebook accounts and Instagram accounts, email accounts. All of them were just joined as soon as they got married. So this isn't as uncommon as I think a lot of people might think it is, but just keep that in mind. You guys can use the same email address for both. So we'll hit save. All right. So we've got our contacts put in. I've got myself, I've got my two sellers. We can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is our forms. This is where we're going to start getting into some of the differences between how Transaction Desk refers to things and how you guys might normally have heard things referred to in the past. So in this case, what we're actually seeing here is that forms is specifically referring to interactive forms that we can fill out. So the forms that we actually have access to in Transaction Desk are going to allow us to put in details that we've already put in. So like if there's a form that requires the address information that we've filled in on that first step of this wizard will automatically be put into it. There's going to be another section immediately after this that's called documents. The documents, on the other hand, is going to be the static information. So forms, automatically filling. We have some extra options that we can fill out. Each of the forms will have their own fields that might need to be filled in manually. Whereas documents is just going to be where you guys can effectively just store things that are already complete. So for instance, if you guys have a property condition disclosure that they filled out in person, or an inspection report, or an appraisal, or the property data form, or just anything that you guys have already gotten done in MeetSpace, you guys can scan it, put it onto there, and you're good to go. But in the case of the forms, when I click on this add button, it's actually going to bring up a pre-formatted list of all of the forms that we have already added into our system. So here we have folders for Ada and Bartlesville. We've got some generic folders. We've got some for SOAR. We've got some for Sober, Texoma. So there's a whole bunch of regionally specific folders. And then there's also going to be these 5 in the middle that are actually meant to be the effectively baseline. These are the ones that are going to have GTAR and OREC forms in them. But we're going to be redoing all of this in the very near future. We've had some complaints about how this kind of muddies the water. We also want to make sure that each of the forms that are specific to a certain area are all kind of in the categories, so that instead of it being this massive list of folders and then having to jump into, like in our case, the residential contracts and forms, and then having another massive list of forms, we're going to try and get things organized into a little bit more sensical fashion. This is actually a process that I've been going through for the past month, trying to make sure that we do everything right, because, you know, anytime we make changes, it's someone somewhere is not going to like what we did, and someone somewhere is going to absolutely love it. So we're trying to make sure we hit that nice balance in between that. But in our case, we're going to be working with a residential form set. So I'm going to go into the residential forms and contracts. And we again see this massive list of just a ton of different forms. We've got some GTAR forms in there. We've got a whole bunch of OREC forms in there. But in my case, what I need is the listing agreement. Now I happen to find the OREC version. This is actually the one that I wanted. But again, if I'm coming into this raw without any knowledge of where things are or how things are organized, it might be a little bit difficult to actually track things down. So up here at the top right corner, there is going to be a search option. This is what I recommend that people use, even if you know what the exact name is of this form because you've used it a dozen times or whatever. I still recommend using this, if only for one reason. When I type in lead, for instance, I'm going to see lead-based paint disclosure, lead-based paint seller disclosure. Oh, looks like this one's in SOAR. Here's one that's in residential. We've got one that's in Ada, property management. But if I want this lead-based paint disclosure to be added into my transaction, I'm going to type in my search, find the one that I was interested in, and then I can see which folder this happens to be stored in. So the name of the form is going to be showing in blue. I hold my cursor over it, it'll turn into that green link. And then we also have the residential contracts and forms, which is the folder that it's contained within down below it. Now watch what happens when I check the checkbox for this. I'm only going to be checking this one checkbox, and it's going to fill up my basket with just one item. So I check the checkbox, one item, cool. I know that I've got one form in my little basket here. I can even click on the basket to verify that. But you'll notice on the screen, we actually have 3 different checkboxes that appeared. One appear in the ADA folder, the one that I found that was in the residential contracts and forms. And then down here at the very bottom, there's also another one that's in the Texoma folder that's got checked. This is only indicating one thing. All 3 of those forms, the ones that actually have the checkbox on them, are the exact same form. So you don't have to worry about accidentally having filled up your basket with a bunch of duplicates. It's literally just indicating that this exact same form has been organized into 3 different folders. So not to worry, we haven't done anything wrong. I'm going to do the same thing with my exclusive right to sell. Exclusive, find my residential contracts and forms folder. Here's my OREC version of it. And again, I got one up here in ADA, another one that happens to be down here in SOAR. But again, they're the exact same form. You don't have to worry about having added accidentally 3 different extra forms. My basket only increased by 1, and I can see that I've only added 1 copy of it. Now, finally, we're also going to add a 3rd document. These are just going to be our examples for the day. If you guys do end up wanting to add more when you guys are going through this or just see how other things work, you can go ahead and do so. This is just the stuff that we're going to be focused on. So I've got all 3 of those added in there, a blank addendum, my listing agreement, and my disclosure of lead-based paint. So I'll hit add, and all 3 of those appear on my list now. Now, you can always get into a preview of these in advance, but I suggest actually waiting until you're actually done with the wizard process, because if you notice, once you start clicking into things, it starts traveling into different places. It's best just to get all the way through the wizard before you start trying to preview things or double check things, whatever the case may be. All right, so the final step of our process, again, we just finished up with our forms. We'll hit next and get into our documents. Now, the document section is going to be a little bit simpler. Instead of having a whole bunch of lists of things that might not be familiar to you, or you might not know if it's the right up-to-date version, the documents section, again, is just going to be stuff that you already have. So if you have a inspection report or an appraisal or the property condition disclosure, or even just like a broker agreement or something like that, you guys can just go up here to the top right, click on add. You notice instead of giving us a big list or a bunch of folders or anything like that, this is literally just asking you to upload something from your computer. So for instance, if I had a window open and I just wanted to move my file over onto that, what I can do is just click and drag that file over from some folder that I already have. Or what I can do is actually just click drag and drop or click to upload, and it'll open that folder for me, select the item, and click open. It uploads whatever the file was. In my case, I actually uploaded a tax record PDF, and I can just be done with it. That's it. There's no extra steps required. As soon as we get to the signing, I can add signing blocks to this or add extra details to this if I need to. But this static piece of information is now contained within the folder that I've created for this whole property transaction situation, whatever. All right, so just to do, again, a quick recap here. We started our transaction. We gave it a name right up here at the top. We filled in some of the details about the property. We have it in an open status because we do not have an MLS yet. We've got the transactions dates, when it's going to get listed, when it's going to expire. We put in the contacts. Again, we added in 2 sellers in this case. We put in any of the forms that we're going to need. So I've got my listing agreement here. We'll need a property data form and a property condition disclosure later. But again, I need to make sure that before I start going in and getting all of that information, we actually have a listing agreement. And then finally, I added in some of the basic information that I've already gathered, inspections, appraisals, tax records, whatever, onto this documents page. Now, notice on this final step, we don't have a save and exit button because, look at that, we've got a done button. Good to go. And this brings us to our transaction dashboard. Now, the transaction dashboard is giving us effectively an overview of all of the stuff that we've already added into this transaction. And one of the nice things about this is that this is actually showing us some of the basic details over here on the left. We see a quick list of all of our forms that we've added, any of the documents, and then even any of the signings that we've already initiated will actually appear here so that we can check the status of them. Now, just as a heads up, we can go over to any of the details or any of the documents or forms or whatever at the bottom of each of those widgets. We can even unlock this and add in some extra details up here at the top if need be. We can customize that the same way that we did with our agent dashboard on the home page. There's also going to be an extra option over here to the right. Now, you may have noticed that whenever I was going through and had navigated away from this transaction and wanted to get back into this transaction and back into the wizard, I was actually doing so up here at the top right. There it goes, right up here. So if you guys are interested, you can jump back into the wizard and maybe double check some of the work that you've done. But you also have easy access to each of those individual sections as we go down this list. So we've got our dashboard, our details, the contacts, the forms, the signings, so on and so forth. So if I needed to maybe start filling out some forms, I click on forms over here on the right, click on the form itself, and I can make those changes. In my case, that scanned version of the tax record information needs to be modified a little bit. So before we start filling things out to get them signed, I need to make sure that all my ducks are in a row first. So I'm going to go over to my documents section. Let's quickly talk about how to modify documents. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the forms and getting everything signed. So we'll just spend a brief moment here talking about documents. And then we're actually going to take a quick 10-minute break. Quick 10-minute break. It's always 10 minutes. It's not quick. But we're going to take a 10-minute break. That way you guys can have a little bit of relief from having to hear me talk at you. So I'm going to click on this document here. In this case, it happens to be a PDF, which means that there's a possibility that it has multiple pages worth of information. Now, in my case, I actually see that I've got a tax record, so literally directly from the county assessor's office. And then we also have the information from a previous listing on there. I need to separate these two out so that I have my tax records separate from this previous listing detail. So what I'm going to do is over here on the far right-hand side, it's going to be a little checkbox icon. You'll notice that whenever I check something, it fills up a basket up here at the top. This allows me to do any review. So if there was something that I needed to send off to my broker, they can double check my work. We've got some move, merge, copy options. There's a download option in case you guys have a bunch of stuff that you needed to download. If you wanted to start assigning, you guys can actually start assigning with a document that you already have. Print things, fax things, or email things. But in my case, what I actually need to do is take that first page and separate it out into a completely new document. So over here on the right, I'm going to click the menu for this specific item. So instead of it just being a menu for anything that I had checked, this is going to be for just this item. So I click menu, it's got preview, print, download, so on and so forth, all the way down to slice/markup. Now slice/markup is going to be, I need to mark this up. So if there was something that I needed to redact on it or highlight on it or whatever the case may be, I can do that here. We're actually going to be talking a lot about those tools in a minute. But the unique thing for documents is going to be this slice choice. So when you click on slice, what it's going to do is it's actually going to present you with a little preview for every single page contained within this document. We can select individual pages. So notice it has a blue border around it right now. And then up here at the top, I can actually rotate that so that I can put it into the correct orientation. And then I can even leave certain pages selected. So let's say I wanted to grab these three, save those pages, these selected pages, as a completely new document. There we go. Boulder Street, Pawnee, listing. Perfect. So I'm actually going to be saving this as a completely separate document. I hit save. So I know that those have all been saved off as a separate item now. And I can actually leave these pages selected and just hit this remove pages option. Now I'm left with my proper orientation remaining page. I hit save, and I'm good to go. Now, there's a couple extra options within there. I did want to just cover those, primarily just because we do end up having people call in from time to time where they've got some document that they had scanned on their scanner, and lo and behold, it had scanned the front and back, and the back didn't have any information, and they had to remove a bunch of blank pages from a PDF that they needed to get signed, or whatever the case may be. That slice option is really easy to use. If you do end up having any questions about it, though, don't hesitate to give us a call and ask. There's a bunch of extra features within there that's going to help things be a little bit easier to deal with. All right, so that's it for our documents. Let's now move over to our forms section, and let's head to our break. All right, well, so where we left off, we were actually just about to start working on getting the details on the forms filled out. So we've gone through, we've created our transaction, we went through our wizard, we added all of our forms, details, documents, etc. We went through and modified our documents to make sure that they were in the correct format, and made sure that everything was laid out properly. So now we're actually going to go through and get our forms and documents, or our forms filled out so that we can get this sent off to be signed. So the first thing I want to start filling out is actually going to be this listing agreement. Whenever I click on it, instead of giving me a preview like we would have seen when we clicked on the documents or having to go into the slice/markup, when you click on a form, what it's going to do is actually present you with the entirety of the form. So as I scroll through this, I can see that there's a bunch of blue blanks. And then there's also going to be some down here at the very bottom that have already been filled in. So we've got my office, we've got the two sellers put in, we've got their mailing address, and even both of their email addresses put in. Back up at the top of the screen, we've already got our address put in, the legal description, the price, and then of course our two dates. There's also some blanks up here at the top that we may end up needing to put in here that are again just indicated by those blue blanks. So for instance, if I needed to put in my commission, if I wanted to put in my days that I have to get this agreement put in, so on and so forth, you can just click on those spaces and fill them in. If you do click on a space and you want to move immediately to the next one, just like any other place in the computer, just hitting tab will oftentimes move you to the next spot. But I wanted to point something out here. Even though it imported a bunch of information onto this form, let's say that you guys get to the form and you're like, oh, wait, actually, you know what? We actually need to change what the expiration date is. There's a little calendar icon to the left of the dates, and there's even some details in the top portion that'll do this as well. But when you click on the calendar for a date, it'll present you with the different date options. I can select a different date, and this is actually going to go back to my details and feed the information back into any of the other forms. So just to clarify what that means, if I change what my listing agreement date is on this form, so I click on the calendar, change it to a different date, it's going to change it in my details, which means that on any of the other forms that it appears on, it's going to automatically have the new date that I just set on this form. So there used to be an issue with this, and actually I think it was just last year that they ended up getting this all synchronized. So what ends up happening now is that whenever you make a change on a form to a piece of data that was imported, it's actually going to backflow in and make sure that it's updated everywhere else. Because it previously had a little bit of an issue with this, where if you made a change on a form, you would just be making that change on that form and not actually making a change in the transaction itself. So now it's all synchronized back and forth so that way if you make a change in one place, it'll show everywhere else. It's great. A little bit further down on the screen, we're actually going to have another option here that has the date. So whenever I click on this, click the date, And you notice that it actually formats whatever the dates are into the same format that this particular form is looking for. So accepted this blah, 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 day of blah, 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 rather than actually putting it into that, kind of casual format of the 5/18/2022. There's also going to be a couple options on here where there's going to be a is or is not, does or does not, purchase or not purchase, to be or not to be. Whenever you guys have these different options and either or, if you check one, it's not going to allow you to actually check a contradictory term so that both of them are checked simultaneously. If you check one, check the other, you can switch between those back and forth without any concern. So make sure that you guys are kind of keeping an eye on that. We are actually going to be discussing how to set an either or option up whenever we get to our signing process as well. Additionally, there are going to be some fields. Previously, this other conditions actually had a bunch of lines under it, which was meant to allow you guys, if you guys were doing this on paper, to be able to write in a nice straight line, which, to be honest, I have struggles with. My handwriting is atrocious, but I'm a millennial, so I guess sometimes that's part of the reason. So I need those lines if I'm doing things in person, but when we're working in transaction desk, we don't need those lines at all. So when we get to our blank addendum, you'll notice that there's a bunch of lines that are perfectly handy whenever we need to do things in person and meet space. But right now, I don't need that. So when we start typing something, we can just put in any text in there. We can paste things in here. So if you guys have a clause that you needed to add in, go ahead and put that in there. And there's also a new function called add clause, where you guys can create a bunch of clauses in advance and then use those in your system. There's going to be personal clauses, office clauses, system clauses, Santa clauses even. If you guys end up creating any, those will appear here. Since this is a relatively new feature that they actually just introduced earlier this year, we haven't ingratiated into our training program, but if you guys are interested in those, you can find those under the settings. We are going to talk about the templates though, which are effectively a similar setup to begin with. Anyway, so I've got everything that I need to fill out on this particular form done. This is maybe something that I'm more just paranoid about, but up here at the top of the page, there is a manual save option where you guys can take whatever changes you've made, go onto this save icon, click save, and that'll actually save that information into the system. So that even if I, have my computer crash or closed out of the window or whatever the case may be, it's not going to lose the details that I've already put in. The system does automatically save. If I'm not mistaken, I think they still have it set on a 2-minute timer. For those of you guys who, again, are veterans, or even those of you guys who have been through these forms enough times, or even just on simple forms, 2 minutes might seem like a lifetime filling this out. So that might not be something that you'll directly need, but that does mean that you may end up needing to go up here and manually save before you leave this form. It's also worth pointing out that in order to get out of this form, there's a nice exit button up here at the top. It's actually a save and exit button. So a couple of years ago, we actually had been complaining about this, that whenever you actually hit that exit button, it would literally just leave whether it had saved yet or not. Now we've actually got it set up so that it does a manual save first, and then you can exit the form and all of the details that I'd already changed will be preserved. So we really appreciate them adding that in there. So when you hit that save and exit, it brings us back to my basic list. I can see my navigation over here on the side. I can see my wizard over here on the side. And then I click on this one and it brings me back into the preview of the next form that we're going to be filling out. Now there's a quicker and easier way to do this. So here's our lead-based paint disclosure. Here's some of the information that's been auto-filled. Currently, it's technically asking us to fill this in as myself, as the agent for this particular seller. Probably not what I necessarily should be doing, legally speaking. So we're going to talk about how to actually get this manually filled out for the client side. In the interim, just as a heads up, we are trying to request from Transaction Desk to create a separate lead-based paint disclosure form that's going to allow the client to fill these out rather than requiring me to fill these out. So we'll be hopefully seeing that, fingers crossed, in the very near future. If I wanted to leave this lead-based paint disclosure, since again, obviously it's already got everything that I need currently filled in, instead of clicking this save and exit button and then having to go back and do the changes elsewhere, I can click on transaction forms up here at the top. Then I can select whichever item it is that I want to move to next. So in this case, my blank addendum, and I can just dive right into it. So notice we didn't have to go back to the list requiring a page to load, and then jump back into the preview screen requiring another page to load. This way I can just go in one page load to the next preview of the next document that I'm working with. Now on this blank addendum, just as a heads up, the blank addendum only has one space up here at the top for it to automatically fill things in, and that's just the property's address. Here's my nice big blank space. Again, I can click on this, start typing, watch what happens to the lines underneath. Start typing. They all magically disappear so that any of the text that I paste in here is automatically going to be appearing without anything below it. So it makes it a nice blank space for us to put in any of the text that's going to be typed in. Again, here's our add clause button. But down here at the very bottom, the blank addendum does not have any roles that are tied to each of these signature blocks. Now, what that effectively translates to is that I don't have John Smith or Jane Smith's name automatically put in. So I'm going to have to manually add both of those. In this case, I'm only going to be adding John's. I'm going to leave this one for a example of something a little bit later. So I've got this effectively filled in. I'm going to put in actually some real text here. Do you like fruit baskets? Yes, no. Do you have any fruit allergies? And leave it at that. Perfect. We'll again get to an example on this in just a bit here. So I've gotten everything put in that I want. In this case, I'm actually going to go up to the top, do my manual save. Oops. Manual save option. There we go. And now let's talk about how to get this all sent off to be signed. Now, this is where we start getting into at least some minor confusion. I get a call about this probably maybe once every other month, maybe once a month, depending on how frequently people are selling things. There's a signing button over here on the left. I did want to highlight something that we've been kind of skipping over a little bit. Over here on the left-hand side, these are all of the navigation options for the transaction desk system as a whole. This is my dashboard for transactions. This is where I can see all of my transactions, and signings, and all those buttons that we talked about at the very beginning of class. We've got a transactions list. This is where we can jump into any specific details about any specific transactions. It just presents us as a gigantic list of all of our transactions we've created. Similarly, that's going to happen for our signings. This is a transaction or a signing list that includes every signing that we've ever done, whether it's part of a transaction or not. We've got all of the forms in the system, all the documents that have been added to any transaction whatsoever, any tasks, contacts, partners, settings, help, etc. So all of these are going to be for the transaction desk system. In the meanwhile, you guys might have noticed over here on the right-hand side was where I was using to navigate within this transaction. So when people are looking at this form that they just filled out and they want to start a signing, sometimes people will actually go over here to the left to start that up because they see a signing button and they think that that's where they need to go. That's not the right spot. Up here at the top, we actually have the spot that we need to use. We've got a send to new authentisign. So this particular form, the one that I'm looking at, has its own menu up here at the top. This starts up the signing with this particular form. Let's say that it's not just this form that I wanted to send off, but it's actually all of them. We can actually go back to that transaction forms button up here at the top. And again, this shows me a list of all the different transaction forms that I've already got. I've already filled out my listing agreement. I double checked my lead-based paint disclosure, and I got my blank addendum all filled out. So all of these are ready to be sent off. Instead of clicking that signing button up here at the top to start with this particular form that I was just looking at, I can click on transaction forms, check the checkboxes over here to the right, see my basket fill up. Would you look at that? I've got another signing button here. So again, just to be clear, I totally understand why it is that people are having some confusion on this. There's 3 different signing buttons on the screen right now. But just remember, if you guys want to actually start up a signing, you can do it from here, or you can do it from here. Now, if you guys have exited this process and you come back into the system later and you just need to get everything sent off to be signed, when you get into the forms, you can do the exact same thing. We've got checkboxes here. Look at that. There's a basket right up here. And again, another signing button. This is the direct path. I think this is honestly the easiest way to get there. So this is usually what I recommend people to do is get to your forms section over here on the transactions navigation, check checkboxes, click the basket, click the signing, and that initiates the signing with those particular forms that we selected. All right. So starting us off in our signing process, it's going to start us off with a name up here at the top. We've got a preview of all of the different forms that we've added onto this particular signing over here on the left. And then we've got some tool buttons over here to the right. Now, coincidentally, these are all going to be tied to the buttons. So over to the left of these buttons, we see the options for those buttons. Now, before we get started with the previews, the signers, the docs, tools, and everything else, I need to give this thing a name that's going to make sense. Now, since I have my lead-based paint disclosure as the first document on here, this is going to actually name the signing that I'm working with after that first document. Not exactly helpful to me. I want to make sure that this is going to make sense to both me and my client, because this name that's showing up here at the very top is literally what's going to show up in the email whenever we send this off to the client. So in my case, I don't need to include their name, since obviously they're the ones that are going to be receiving this. I have the address in there. That might be helpful for them. It's going to be helpful for me for sure. And then I'm also going to remove the mention of the lead-based paint disclosure. Just type in listing agreement packet. Perfect. So this is going to be the actual subject of the email whenever I send this off to my client. That way I don't have any ambiguity for myself whenever I go back to check the status of the signing. And when my client receives it, they know exactly what this is in regards to so that they don't question the authenticity of the email that I've sent to them. Now over here on the right, the very first thing that it's going to start us off with is the signers option. Now, the signers is going to be who's going to be directly participating in this, or who's going to need to see this or get a carbon copy of this. So I can click on this Add Participants button, and we've got Add Yourself. I don't need to add myself right now. Add New, which means that if I have somebody that was not a part of the transaction already, I can add them on here. This could be a great spot for us to add in any attorneys that are involved or anything like that. We've got an Add from Transaction, which is the one that I'm going to need to use right now, or Add from Contacts, which pulls from my address book within Transaction Desk. But just to be clear, whenever you guys have started assigning within a transaction, the only thing you need to remember is Add from Transaction. That's it. When you click on that, it's going to show you the short list of all the people that you've already added onto the transaction. Check their names, and you're good to go. If you do end up in a situation where you have somebody that's been added as a contact, and maybe they need to just get a carbon copy of this, or maybe it's an attorney that needs to double check that all of this is copacetic first, you guys can actually add an individual and then change their type as well. So what this means is that instead of them being a signer for this, like let's say that I've got an attorney that's involved with this, they just need to review everything first and make sure that their client isn't being slighted in some way. I can actually set them up as a reviewer. Now, if they're set up as a reviewer, they don't have to put their signature on anything. They don't have to fill anything out. But what this means is that they actually do get the opportunity to look at it and give it a binary yes or no. Pretty simple, not much to think about there. They just get set up and you're good to go. The next section down here, we've got John and Jane Smith. Both of those people need to sign. But if we do end up having somebody else that's involved with this, maybe even the listing agent and I'm the selling agent, we can always do a carbon copy of everything, which doesn't require any interaction whatsoever. But if I set myself up as the carbon copy, after John and Jane have completed their signing, I will get a carbon copy of everything once it's done. So 3 different options. I'm going to just leave myself unchecked for now, and we're just going to focus in on our two signers. So now that I've got those checkboxes checked, I've got my type selected properly, I'm going to hit select, and it's going to assign colors to each of these different individuals. Now, what that translates to is that a little bit further down on this, I can now see that John has a signature block here. It matches the color that he has here. And I've got Jane that has a different color, indicating which one is going to be signed by her. If I do end up needing to make any changes to how these individuals are signing, or maybe double check that, in this case, they're both JS, I can actually click on the individuals under the signers portion. So I'm going to click on John first. You'll notice that now I have John Smith and some of the information that I've already filled out for him. Looks like I might need to add in some custom initials. So I'll say J. D. Smith. There we go. And we'll put in a middle initial there just in case. And I'm also going to give him a signing pin. Now, just as a reminder, the signing pin is what I'm going to be using to make sure that since they both have the same email address, John's going to get his pin separate than her, so that way I know that John is not going to accidentally sign as her and she's not going to sign as him. Hit save. We're good. And then I'm going to move on to Jane and make sure that Jane has her information in there. R. Smith. There we go. Signing pin. Perfect. So we've got both of them set up. I'm going to hit save. And now we've got both of their information updated so that now I've got the different initials put in, and then they've also got their own signing pin so that, again, even though they're using the same email address, they are not going to be accidentally signing in as each other. All of this was under the signing option. The next thing I need to make sure that I've got changed is going to be our docs. Now, in this case, I need to first and foremost change the order of this. I wanted to have my listing agreement be the first thing that we see. So I'm going to click on the little kind of handlebar button here that we've got over here to the left, move that up into position so that now the OREC listing agreement is the first thing that they see, lead-based paint is next, and then of course the blank addendum is the last thing they see. Under the docs section is also where we're going to be adding any extra forms or documents. So remember earlier when I was initiating this particular signing, I actually went through the process of adding the checkboxes to each of those. But because I was doing this from the forms section, I did not have the option to include any of the additional documents that I had added. So again, inspection reports, property condition disclosures, blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to go to add a document or form. This presents me with a full list of all of the different items that I had already added. Here's all of the forms. And as you can see, all of those already have a green checkbox next to it. But if I also wanted to include this Pawnee listing, because maybe this includes some of the details about the property in question, I can click this add button over here to the right. What this does is it actually adds that extra document down at the very, very bottom of my document list. So I can scroll down, keep going, past my blank addendum. Here we go. Okay. All I need to do on this particular one is just go ahead and add some initial blocks to make sure that the details that I had gotten from a previous listing are good to go, and I can move forward with adding the listing to the system. But again, that's all completely separate. So let's focus in now on our tools options. So again, we've got our signers added, we've got all of our docs added and in the correct order. So now let's go ahead and start messing with the different signers. So when you get to the tools option, you'll notice that this is actually still obliging those color options that we had from before. So John's information is all going to be showing up as yellow, and I see a bunch of yellow blocks here indicating a sign here option. We've got an initials option. There's a text line option, a checkbox for any kind of acknowledgments that you needed to require from them. There's initial pages, initial choice, radio choice dropdown. We're going to take a brief moment to cover all of those. If you do end up noticing that there's something that you don't want, you can select those items, and it's going to present you with a bunch of different choices as far as whether it's required, adding in a name stamp, date stamp, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about those more in a minute. But if you select something that you don't want, there's going to be a little trash can icon underneath it, or you can select it and hit this delete button down here. You can also just select it, hit delete, select, delete on your keyboard, select and hit backspace on your keyboard, whichever option is going to be easiest for you. So I'm going to scroll down here and let's actually talk about our practical example. And of course, I accidentally left this checkbox checked. That's my mistake, but we'll pretend that that's not there for now. So the sign initials, those are relatively easy options to verify. If we do end up having something that's just effectively an acknowledgement, so like here's an agent's acknowledgement. Let's pretend that this actually says seller's acknowledgement. This checkbox option, when you first add it on there, is going to just be a little required field. We know that it's required because it's got a red border around it and a little red asterisk. If the field, like the sign here option, is large enough, it'll actually indicate with the little red tag required. When we add that on there, again, we can always make changes to it. We can scale it up, scale it down. We can turn off whether or not it's required or not. And then we can delete it, save it as a default, duplicate, whatever. We also have an option here for text line. So for instance, if I needed to make sure that if they do have some kind of lead-based paint on the house, I can actually add in some text. This is going to require John to actually add text into the system. So this is not meant for me to add text. This is meant for John to have space to write something. So I'm going to expand that out a little bit, add in a little bit extra space for him to type, since 175 is a little short. And then I also can choose whether I want this to be required or even allow for multiple lines of information. I also have an either or option here. So again, known or has no knowledge. That's actually where we're going to be using our radio choice option. The radio choice will actually be dropping two different items, and you'll notice that they actually have a number to their option. So in this case, when I added this on there, it's the first radio choice that I've chosen. I can click and drag those into position to make sure that they're in the right spot. And again, when he gets the option to fill this out, he's going to check one. If he checks the other, it's going to automatically uncheck the other. So again, this is an either or option. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to just two items either. So like, let's say that there was three different lines of information on here. I can go add something on there. As soon as I drop it, again, notice it comes up with a different number. And then I can drop the other one into position properly, select it, and there's even a plus button to add a third option on there. So again, instead of just being limited to an either or, I can have a multiple choice option where they have to choose one or the other. Now, on this separate section here for the purchaser's agreement, again, let's just pretend this is all still related to the signer. There is also another option. Instead of it just being a radio choice, we can do an initial choice. So if it was an either or option on this C and D, I can drag the initial choice on there and notice again, it's going to give us a number associated with this either or. Scale that down, and then drag drop that into the right position. So now what JD can actually do is put in either his initials here, or if he clicks on this one instead, it's going to put in his initials there. So it's an either or option. Again, you guys can make changes to the scale on some of these, but on any of the multiple choice options, and this was a question that we had yesterday during class, these are just automatically required. So we did have somebody asking why it is that, if I select this text, it's going to ask me if I want it to be required or not. Any signature blocks I can choose to be required or not. But when it comes to the multiple choice, it's effectively just automatically considered a default requirement. So just keep that in mind. We also have an extra option that was recently added called the drop-down choice. Now, the drop-down choice is fairly simple. If you guys do end up having a drop-down option that you need to add, just as a heads up, this drop-down can include several items. So I can say none, blah, 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 and so on. And so what John will actually have the option to do is choose one of these in order to actually select it in that dropdown. Only one of those items, whichever one they choose, will actually be the text that appears on that page. So bear in mind that this has a very limited mobility, or very limited utility. If you do end up needing it, it's available. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. All right. Now, one of the final options that I wanted to talk about before we move on to the layouts choice is this initial pages option. So I mentioned as our practical example that I've also provided them with the previous listing data from a listing for their property a while ago. I just wanted to verify with them if there was anything that needed to be updated on here. So I'm going to do this initial pages option, and it gives me the choice to choose what size I want this to be, where I want it to be oriented, so on the left, center, or right side, or if I want this to be on the top or bottom of the page. So I want this to be up at the top right of the page in a small little format, and I needed both John and Jane to sign this. Now, it also gives us the option to choose which documents are going to appear on. So I'm going to choose, again, my final page here. And I'm going to just go ahead and say, I want this on page 1 and 2. There we go. So that way it's only going to appear on the first page and the second page. And then that third page, since it's just showing the property's location, I don't need them to verify that. I know that that's accurate. So I could just get their initials there. When I hit place initials, I'm going to see that appear right up here at the top. And that allows me to quickly just jump right into getting those initials, no matter how many pages of information. And I also can just move things around after the fact rather than having to manually go through, add one, switch over to Jane, add the other, switch over back to John, add one, switch over to Jane, add the other. It's just too much hassle, in my opinion. All right, so the last thing I wanted to talk about was the layouts. Now, as we've been going through and actually adding some of this stuff on here, we've kind of been doing this just kind of fly by the seat of our pants, just showing you guys what the options are. Let's say that once you guys have actually gotten everything set up, you guys want to start doing this again in the future, there is a choice here called layouts, where if you have created the way that you want this to be laid out in the past, you can come into layouts, go to this particular form that you were looking at, do apply layouts, find whichever form it was that you were working with, click on the template that you're going to be using, and I'm going to say fruit basket, and this is going to apply that onto that particular page. So now I see that I've got an either or option. There's even a little drop down here that allows me to quickly jump into whatever their allergies are. And if I need to, I can just resize this. Go, oops, oh, and as I get rid of the option, lovely. Let's try that again. Delete that, all right. So I can move that all into position. And so this is something that I had created entirely before. So instead of having to worry about, recreating everything that I had done by manually adding things over and over and over again, I can just start with whatever the layout was that I created. It's going to automatically remember which roles were which so that it just applies that in the right order. Now, in my case, it looks like it actually had a different order to where the names were previously. I can actually get rid of those. Again, just select them, hit delete, and you're good to go. All right. So the final thing that I wanted to talk about was the options within these little tool choices. I keep on saying final thing. I apologize. One of the things I wanted to discuss is just when we add something onto this, we don't have to just leave it as it is. In this case, I'm going to make sure that John's name is a little bit different size. Again, I can do that with this scalar option here. We can choose whether it's required or not. There's also going to be a name block and a date stamp option, as well as a timestamp, which I have yet to find anybody who's got a practical use for that. But I guess if you have offers coming in, you could be like, hey, we signed this earlier than you signed your other document or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to move my date stamp into the right position. And then over here to the right, I actually need to add in Jane's signature. So when I drag and drop this one on here, drop it into position, resize it, move the date in the right spot. Wait a second, it doesn't actually say who's supposed to be signing this. So when I select it, I can actually add in the name block and it'll automatically pin that underneath wherever it was that the signature block had appeared. You can also do this manually if you'd like using the signer fields over here to the right, where you can add in full names, an automatic date, what email address it might have been sent to, and also the auto time. So all of these options can be added just using the signer fields, or whenever you select a specific item, you can add in name blocks, you can add in date stamps, time stamps, etc. Now, I usually recommend to people that the only thing you leave as a default is the date stamp, but if you guys do end up liking the name stamp or even the timestamp being on there, you can save that as your default settings. Now, all of the stuff that we've been discussing so far has all been color coded because we've been talking about these signers themselves. Let's say that we get to the point that we are taking a look at this particular form and we're like, wait a second, I forgot to put in the estimated cost of my services. You know what? I'm going to need to put in a little text box. The text line that we saw earlier, again, it's going to be color coded to indicate that this is connected directly to a specific individual that's signing. If I need to add information onto this that's separate from that, that's where the markup option comes into play. So I'm going to click text box. There we go. Click on where I need to enter the text, move it into position, click on the actual text space, and I can put in my price. Whatever. We'll get a whole $6 million, I guess. So we've got that put in there. We can adjust where it's located. We can select it and actually adjust the font size. If we wanted this to be smaller, if we wanted it to be black and yellow, if we wanted it to be a specific font size or font family, whether it's bold, italic, transparent background, whatever we need to make changes. Additionally, we also have a highlight option. You select it, click and drag, and it'll highlight that area for you. There's also a line option. I really like the line option because this one actually allows you to just click on it. And then if I needed to block out some areas, like do some redactions of this particular portion, I could just click and drag, and notice it's still selected. So once I'm done with my first line, click and drag, and click and drag. So you can block out all of those portions really quickly and easily. In order to prevent me from accidentally clicking and dragging all over the place, I just have to click on the line button again, and I'll be able to go back to making any changes that I needed to. All right. There's also a freehand option. So the line one I prefer, but if you guys want to, if you got a really steady hand, or if you needed to like kind of highlight a specific area, you can do that with the little line tool. It literally just follows your cursor around. Not my favorite, but I also don't have particularly steady hands, as you guys have probably noticed. And then finally, we have the ellipse option. This one's going to just be either a blank entry, or we can change the color to red or black, whatever. Just as a heads up, on the highlight option, you do have the choice to select it, change what color that it's actually going to be appearing in. And you can even change it to black and then make it completely blacked out. But as you guys have probably have been told in the past at some point, hopefully, you can't block things out like this. So just make sure that you guys try to set this up in a legal and ecumenical way. All right, that should be it for our tools. We've already talked about our layouts. Again, if I have laid something out on a company form or company document or whatever the case may be, something that I'm going to be using again in the future, make sure that you remember that create option. That's it for our layouts. Let's now talk about our options. Now the options section, I think, it's not useless, but it does actually already have pretty much everything else that we need elsewhere. So the first thing that it offers up here at the top is signing details, which is the name of it. So we don't have to worry about that. It's already up here at the top. The expiration date and reminders are also going to be popping up whenever we click next to be sending this off to the client. So we've got an expiration date and a reminder option before we send this off to the client. The final option though, the AuthentiSign ID position, this is going to be an important one because this is effectively what's going to actually be added as like a receipt number to the signing itself. AuthentiSign ID is directly referencing the code that Transaction Desk uses to keep track of every single signing that's passed through their system. You can add that in on a specific position. I think the default at the top left is perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about it. And then there's also a final option to clear everything that we've done, which I'm not going to do. So I'm going to go up here to the top and hit next. And this allows me to just go ahead and start up with the expiration and reminders. I can choose when it is that they have to get it done by. And then I'm also going to choose to send them a reminder every day at 9 a.m. There's also a button down here at the bottom to customize invites so that if you have a specific order that you're going to be sending this off in, or if you have a specific instruction that you needed to provide to somebody, you can say, please sign immediately. There we go. Give them a custom message. There we go. Now I'm going to customize it for John so we can see what that customization looks like. And then I'm going to leave Jane's on the default so you guys can see what that looks like. So hit save, I'm going to hit send, and that's it. So at this point, what this means is that I've actually gotten all of my information set up, sent out, and now I'm just waiting for my two participants, John and Jane, to actually go ahead and get this signed. So as a little preview of what the client will actually end up seeing, I'm actually going to get signed into that email address that I sent it to, and we're going to show you guys what it looks like to actually sign these particular signings. Now, the signings go out really quickly. Again, I just hit that send button a moment before. It's actually taken longer for my web page to load than they've already been sent off. So here we are. I've got my training agent options. This one that says, please sign immediately. Again, that's the one that I sent off to John. Go ahead and click on it. It says, hello, John. So it should be pretty clear this is who's supposed to be signing this. But as always, if you do have people that are sharing the same email address, that signing pin should just effectively be required in your brain. So hit start signing. John's going to have to put in his signing pin that I delivered to him securely. There we go. It's going to ask him to acknowledge that this is a legally binding contract, terms and conditions, blah, 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 accept. And now John gets to see the preview of all of the information that we have in there. Any of the stuff that we've crossed out, any of the spaces that he needs to sign, any of the options that he's going to have to choose between, so on and so forth. Now, for those of you guys who have clients that might be of limited mobility or maybe not particularly technologically savvy, they can hit the space bar to initiate their signing process, or they can hit this start button over here at the top right. So if I hit the space bar, it's going to bring me to my first space that he can sign. If I hit the space bar again, or if I click on this, I leave my cursor off of it, it's going to initiate the actual signing itself. So in this case, we've got three different ways for us to have people sign. Either they choose a style of font. So in this case, I'm going to have John sign as this nice late 80s, early 90s handwritten font. We've got a draw option, which is going to be great if people have really good proficiency with using the, all right, never mind. If they're really good at their mouse, cool. If they're actually doing this on a touch screen or something with a pen like an iPad, they can use that draw function a lot better. There's also an upload option, which I don't know about you guys, but I don't want anybody to have a clear copy of my signature to apply to whatever document that they get. It's probably easy to find, but I don't want that. So I'm going to just use this Rage Italic, hit send, and then now I just get to move between each of these. If I end up needing to, again, continue to use the space bar, I can hit space to select something, type things in that might need to be, and then I can hit tab to move in between each of these items. So if I hit space again, it selects the alternate option. I didn't want that one. I hit space there. Yeah, sign it, sign it, sign it. Again, I'm just hitting space, 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 and I'm done. When we go through and sign as Jane, I'm going to use the buttons over here on the side or the buttons on the actual name of the signing block. But he's done. That was it. He can hit this little X and go, double check everything is correct if he needs to, if he just like spammed the space bar to get through as quickly as possible. But once he's done, hit finish, complete signing, and he's out of here. We're going to take a look at this little receipt number. Just a heads up, DF9D. Just remember that number, DF9D. This is our receipt number for this particular signing. I'm going to jump back over here. We're going to take a look now at Jane's signing. So again, when I click on this, this is just the generic information. So without any customization, no extra messages or anything like that. It just shows your signature is requested. End of story. She has a big button here for start signing. Now she gets to go through the signing process after she puts in her PIN. There we go. And I do accept. And we can hit start. Here's our block. I can click the block, choose what style I want. Block, no. Any fruit allergies, oranges. Click on the block, 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 and now she's done as well. Again, there was also the option if we, let me actually reset all of these. Oh, that's right, change signature actually does that. There we go. So we can hit next, 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 and so on and so forth to move between each of these. You still have to engage the blocks when you're using that next button though. So those signature blocks still have to be clicked in order for them to be functional. Go, click, 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 and she's done. So we've got that same DF9D option down here at the bottom. So what this means is that whenever we get done with this particular signing, the signing process itself, so literally all the documents that were sent off, all the people that were involved in that signing, all of that data is preserved with this extremely long receipt ID. Now, the reason why they have something so long and complicated is because at least sometime in the very recent past, like 2019, we would occasionally have lenders stuff that were like, nope, sorry, you signed this in AuthentiSign or you signed this in Transaction Desk or whatever, and they would not accept it as a legally binding contract because there was some perception that there was some flaws in e-signing process. This particular number is going to include a ton of information about exactly who it was that signed, what email address it was sent to, what IP address of the computer it was they signed it on, and even what exact second it was that they completed their signing process. So all of that information is going to be preserved in that signing ID. They can download or print the information that they got, and that's it for them. So they're all done with their signing process. In a couple minutes here, they're actually going to, oh, actually, never mind. It's not even a couple minutes now. We've actually got a version of each of the signing documents for both John and also for Jane. So she can get in there, see all of her signed documents, get all of the signed document certificates, and they can go ahead and keep that information for their own records if need be. So close out of that. So let's actually see what happened back here on Transaction Desk. Now I have not left my screen, so I'm still on this signings portion. It now shows that this has been completed, and I can see that both of the participants have a little green checkbox next to their name indicating that they have finished their work. Now, once the signing has been completed in Transaction Desk, all of the signed documents have now been moved over into the Documents section. So just as a reminder, we started filling all of those out under Forms. We initiated our signing from Forms, and then we even added in the tax record information from previous, or the listing information from a previous listing under Documents. But when we get into the Documents section, we now see that there's a folder that's been created named the exact same thing that I named that signing. This means that all of the signed documents have actually been collected into a nice handy folder for me showing the exact minute that this particular signing was completed. And I can actually see all of those individual forms that have been signed. And we can see that they're signed by this little padlock to the left of it, certified and digitally signed. Now, once we get to the point that we actually have to send that disclosure of lead-based paint off to be signed by the buyer in this case, I'm going to check the checkbox here, go up to the basket. I can initiate my new signing. And from here, I can add in my buyers and make sure that they actually have the space down here at the bottom to sign those. Just as a heads up, none of the signature blocks will appear until after you've added in those contacts. Just as a heads up, that means that you're going to have to go in and manually add in on anything that's already been signed the different signing blocks for those individuals. just keep that in mind that you're still going to have the option to add extra people on and do extra signings on things that have already been signed. It's just going to be done from the documents section. All right. Now, the last thing that I wanted to discuss today was the transaction templates. I mentioned this at the very beginning of class, and I want to make sure that you guys leave with this knowledge. So over on the far left of the screen, there's a little gears icon. This gears icon allows us to see the preferences and other settings in here. Here's where we can find our clauses if you guys want to set up some clauses in advance, especially for those of you guys who are doing the same clauses often, you might need to have that available. There's also going to be a section here for transaction templates. Transaction templates should have nothing in there by default unless you guys already have a particular template that maybe somebody had already created for you. So like if you had a admin in your office who was trying to make sure that everybody had anything that they needed in advance, they can go ahead and create those and then share those with the office. If you guys are an admin or a broker for your office, you do have the option to create a template that is going to be owned by everybody in the office. Now, right now, everything that I'm seeing in here is just going to be agent specific. I don't have any office level transaction templates that everybody can use. But if I need to add one for myself, so if I'm ready to just start using templates and make my life a little easier, I click this add button up at the top right, give it a name. I'm going to do residential listing packet, auction only, choose my residential listing and save. Now it brings us to a page where we have the checklist that we can create. This is I mean, they're not as explicit about saying this, but this is kind of a beta feature. This is something that they added whenever we ended up having .loop start using really robust checklists. You guys can use those though. They're fully functional. I have noticed that there are some things that aren't quite as explicit with the checklist though. So you can use those. You can choose not to, it's whatever. Contact section, I actually would not use. We did have an incident one time where somebody had created a template. It was originally something that they created for a specific individual, and then they wanted to use that again in the future. So they actually created a contact for the seller that they were working with and added all the forms and documents. But every time they used that template again in the future, they kept on getting that same seller added. So just bear that in mind that any contacts that you add on here are going to appear on any transaction that you use this template on. For those of you guys who work at offices where everybody ends up doing, all of their listings under a specific person, which just as a heads up is not recommended. You guys can add those contact information pieces from there. Again, we at the MLS are not particularly comfortable with that. Sometimes it feels a little bit misleading, but again, we'll leave it at that. We also have a documents and folders section. So what you can do is in advance of the transaction even being created, you could put together a folder that's going to allow everybody to put in, appraisals, disclosures, whatever, into a folder that already exists. Or you can even add in any custom company documents so that, for instance, if you do end up in a situation where you guys have like a broker information pamphlet that everybody that you guys list with has to get, you guys can add that in advance so that when you guys start the transaction, it's already on there. But then finally, the part that I think is most important is the forms section. So instead of having to go through on every single transaction and add in everything that you guys are always going to be using, you guys can click on this Add Forms button, search for or manually go find each of the different forms that you're going to be using. Just grab a bunch of these OREC things. There we go. Dump those on there. And now all of a sudden, I'm ready to start rolling as soon as I add the transaction to the system and use this particular template. Further, if you guys are using something that's very situational, so like in this case, I created one that's auction only. If there were portions of a contract that I actually needed to get rid of, so like redact it, mark it up, or have it marked in the future, I can get into these, click on this little markups option, which we had the option to do earlier as well. We can redact certain portions. We can go ahead and highlight certain portions. We can even go in and actually add in some text so that in advance of even creating the transaction, I'll have my name. Why is it not letting me type in there? Oh, that's the strikeout. Chose the wrong choice here. Here's the annotate option. Boom. This is a test. Perfect. I can add in some text in advance so that if there was some specific clause that I needed to add, or if there was some specific highlight or line or whatever the case may be, you guys can actually go through and add all of that on there. All right. So that's it for our template option. Just as a heads up, under the forms, whenever you guys are adding forms onto a specific transaction, just bear in mind that there is a property data form that you guys can add that'll allow you guys to just automatically import some of the data that you've already added over onto your property data forms so that you don't have to fill all of this out from scratch. And then it also does allow for those of you guys who have added permissions to just upload that listing as an incomplete listing into Matrix directly. So that saves you guys a lot of time. You guys can just jump right over into Matrix, grab the incomplete listing that you got created, and you guys can run from there instead of having to start from absolute bare minimum scratch. There's also going to be two different forms when you guys are working in the system that allow you guys to do the residential property condition disclosures. They are separated out into two different variants. Property condition disclosures have a, let me find the residential one. Here we go. An agent version and a client version. A lot of people end up panicking because they get into the agent version and they see all of the options that they thought that they were going to have. And then when they try to do the client interactive version, they get into the preview and they see that there's no checkboxes on any of these. And they kind of think, wait a second, this isn't going to work right. Just as a heads up, and I apologize, this is going a little bit over on our time today, but we've had a lot of issues with this recently. People have been calling in a panic. If you use the property conditions disclosure, that's the client version, as soon as you add in a client, then you get the options to actually fill them out. This is how it's supposed to be filled out. John will be the one that has to go through and add in his signature blocks on everything. The client interactive is the one that you're supposed to be using, just as a heads up. All right, but that's it for our class today. If I could get everybody to hit that raise hand button, I just need you guys to wave before we go. I just want to know that everybody's still here and was paying attention. Again, this will be required for me to be able to justify our CE credit. But after that, hit that raise hand button and you guys can go ahead and dip. If you would like to stick around to ask any questions, you can go ahead and do so. So I think James, if you wouldn't mind hitting that, and Jasmine, if you wouldn't mind as well. Beyond that, thank you guys again so much for joining us today. Sorry that it was a little bit less coherent than usual, but really been thrown off by these allergies. So yeah, James and Jasmine, if you guys wouldn't mind hitting that raise hand button, I want to make sure that you guys can get that CE credit. But if you guys have already hit that raise hand button, you guys can go ahead and leave. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Stay safe. Take your allergy medicine. Keep practicing that social distancing. Mask up if you're in a populated spot. Hopefully we'll see you guys in future classes. James, if you can hear me, man, if you could hit that raise hand. Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Just wanted to make sure. I don't want you to miss out on credit. Jasmine, if you're still there. Oh, excellent. See, this is why I wait, because I know that not everybody's got, blazing fast internet. I don't want to be like, oh, well, these guys don't get credit because their internet's slower than everybody else's. I just wanted to give you guys a chance to hit that button. I appreciate it. I'll get you guys your CE credit. Hopefully I'll see you guys in future classes. Janice, I think I did miss a hand raise earlier, but obviously you're still here and hit that raise hand earlier, so or now. So I'll make sure that you get your credit as well. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. I saw that all of you guys have hit that raise hand button. You can leave if you'd like. If you do have a question, stick around, ask it. I'll be here for you.